Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from Holyoke, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and I am here with our very own historian, Robert Camus. He is the founder and also the tour guide of the Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke. He offers both public and private tours of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Massachusetts. You can also check out his website for more information at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has videos and photos of past and present, as well as 2023 schedule for his tours. Today we will be discussing the Maple Street area. So, what tours do you give that are near the Maple Street area?
This is Maple Street in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and it's such an involved street that many of my tours cross paths with this one. So when I gave the Maple Street tour for the first time in the year 2023, people said, "Oh, didn't I take that one already?" No, but many tours cross right through it, and so they had a thought they did. And so this year we went 8 blocks upwards to the south of Maple Street, and then we were done and we came back. We went from Pulaski Park to the Sacred Heart Church. Now, what tours cross along the way? The Pulaski Park tour, the Mata della Rosa Church Campus tour, the Veterans Park tour, and the St. Jerome's Church Campus tour, then the library tour. And then I have a special tour that goes from Veterans Park onto High Street, so that one crosses it. And then I don't have a tour yet for Sacred Heart, but someday I will. But this year we went up to the Sacred Heart Church campus. We talked about that. So I think that's about 6 tours cross it already. But by itself, Maple Street is a great interest. And so I had a special tour this year.
Now, tell us about the Sacred Heart Church campus.
All right, the Sacred Heart Church campus is a very simple campus. It was made ahead of time to know what was going to be where because it was an offshoot of the St. Jerome's Church. And that had come about in 1856. And in 1876, they decided to make Sacred Heart Church in the upper part of this large neighborhood. And when they did, they bought a city block, and inside of it, they built a church with a chapel in the back of it. They built a rectory along its side, and they would eventually build up and have a convent because the school came next, and then they had an auditorium built there. So they knew ahead of time where it was going to build. It's not like most places that are first, especially of a given ethnic groups, don't know where things are going to go. They don't have the money. They don't know where they're building. But in this case, like in a few other cases, when you come second or third in a series of an ethnic church, then you know what's coming in. And so you know where things will belong. But the Sacred Heart Church campus, what does it have? That church was from 1876, and the steeple came in 1892. It's the tallest structure with that steeple in the city of Holyoke. And the rectory came at the same point, and it was inhabited by James Sheen, the first pastor for 4 years until he died. And then the school system came in 1883, which means you need the convent, which came a few months after. And the school was a gorgeous 3-story building. And then lastly, they had the auditorium come in. That was like 1927 it came in. And they also got their own cemetery, which is unusual for a second generation church. It's the daughter church of the St. Jerome's Church. And their cemetery, Sacred Heart Church Cemetery, is the Calvary Cemetery. And some offshoots came out of this Sacred Heart. They started up a couple of their own churches as mission churches. The Blessed Sacrament Church and the Holy Rosary Church came next. So a lot came out of this, and I'm glad people were able to see it this year.
So tell us about some of the buildings that do not get much attention on Maple Street.
Yeah, so I have all these tours crisscrossing Maple Street. And so they were part of that tour. And so I went through a few of them again as I went up Maple Street. But I try to stress the buildings you don't see very much every day that aren't on a lot of tours. And it gave people, in a sense, there's much more to Maple Street. And for instance, we went by the St. Jerome's Temperance Union, which is still there. It has a brand new facade, but it's still in place. And that was a place where the men of St. Jerome's Church could go and socialize and tell each other we're going to stay away from alcohol. That's why it's a temperance union. Also, as you go up the street, you have the Unity Church, which is not there anymore, but it was replaced at some point by the American Telephone Company's building, which then became Verizon building. But it was built in the 1920s, that building. And as you go upwards, you get to see a lot of tenement houses along the way. You also get to see the Sons of Zion Synagogue, which has been sold this year, and it's going to change hands. But they had been there from approximately 1940, and they had renovated to have a true synagogue inside of it. And so I'm glad that people get to see a lot of these smaller buildings along the way.
Now compare and contrast Maple Street to High and Chestnut Streets.
Yeah, so each street has a personality, and Holyoke, sure, they're on the gridded pattern. But what happened, you never know what's going to really happen, no matter how much you plan. And what it turned out to be was High Street became the retail street almost its entire length. And it did have a few fraternal groups. It did have a few professional offices and places to live. And they always had the same style. Store, then professional place, then people's apartments, and then on the top fourth floor they would have a hall. Now onto Chestnut Street, which is 2 streets up, that one was a lot of institutions along, especially churches. You can find the fronts, backs, or sides of 5 different churches on Chestnut Street. And in between, sure, there's a few houses, but mostly it was schools and churches and big parks. Now, Maple Street, it had its different personality because you find a lot more apartments, and especially in tenement houses, but then in more sophisticated looking apartments. And that's because you already had the retail giant of High Street, and you already had most of the institutions on Chestnut. And you did get a few institutions, so there was a fire station. This is a fire station built in 1920 on Maple Street. And there were a few churches, so it's more of a mixed bag when you go to Maple Street. Instead of saying this is what High Street is and this is what Chestnut Street is, Maple is all of those things put together. And so that's how it got its personality. And being so close to the other two, there's quite the spillover. But those 3 streets make the backbone of Holyoke. High, Maple, and Chestnut have most of the old-time institutions, and that's incredible because once you get up to the next streets up, Elm and Walnut and Pine and Linden and Oak, you get mostly residential with only a sprinkle of institutions. So the comparison is there's some similarities between these 3 streets. The contrast is Maple's got a lot more apartments to live in.
Well, thank you all for joining us. And again, you can find out more information on his tours at his website, which is holyokecanaltour.org, where you can find out information on his various tours, check out some of his videos and past and present photos, and as well as his upcoming 2023 tour schedule. You can also set up private tours with him as your personal tour guide. They make for a fun and educational activity for the family, or for group parties, for those special occasions and events, or for just a day out. You can email him directly to set those up at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Again, that's BOBCAT4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, what life was like in the industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Camus. He personally offers and leads private and public tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout Mass. Currently, the communities that he selected to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. And his tours spotlight on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, and also parks, streets, and historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the streets of Holyoke. So, why do some of the streets of Holyoke deserve a comprehensive study?
Because they've been laid out in a grid, but also because they had so many institutions, stores, schools, churches on them, that you have to really look at them and see how people got around. Back in 1850, when it was settled, they got around by walking. You can look at it that way. Or you can look at it in terms of the way the trolley went around. All right, so we're going to talk about during this podcast what this pattern was and whether other places have this pattern. And then what are some of the reasons some of the streets off this pattern of the grid are still interesting. And so you really need to look at why they use this pattern, because it was a program city, a planned city, a place that everything was planned out in advance, what's going to be where. And they did that because they wanted to have the institutions, the residences, the mills, the canals all fit together correctly. And you need to have a pattern to get everything close enough together. Remember, no cars, no trolleys, no really good way of getting around, and you have a lot of things to do. So you better be with a plan. You better have some kind of structure to what you're doing, and hence the grid of streets.
And why were the streets of Holyoke laid out the way they are?
All right, they're laid out the way they were because the canal was primary, and that right there sets out what you're going to do. And the canal is mostly a canal going from direction of north to south. All three canals basically go in that direction for most of the stretch. And so the roads should go in that direction, and they do. Most of them are based upon a north-south pattern, with the east to west roads just backing up or being secondary. The northwest roads are longer. They're also longer in the C block than the east-west length of the block. And it's set up so people can get around very quickly, get to the mills, get to work, get back at home, and then you need the schools and churches around that area, so you have to have it all packed in as efficiently as possible. Now, most places, you don't have that, right? And so thus, you have this structure, and it needed that uniformity, but it also needed that ability to get from one place to the next, because say that you're one mill selling equipment to another mill, you want to have the ability to get out there very quickly and efficiently and do it. But most important, you want to pack everything in to the same location so that it's very close to the mills, which are all on the canal system. So once that canal system formed that structure, you have to put the streets around it as packed as possible. And the best packing way is rectangular.
And quickly, before we continue with our interview, just to fill our listeners in, for more information, or if you want to sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org, and there you can find videos and podcasts along the stops of each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, @yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun educational outdoor activities for the whole family and group parties. Getting back to our interview, do other cities or towns have such patterns?
Very few do. Remember that Holyoke truly is the first planned industrial city in the world. And you gotta say fully planned. And if you qualify fully planned, where every detail in the industrial sector is laid out in these patterns, and they're very close by the mills and the canals. And then you say it's also industrial, a fully planned industrial city. Well, once you say that, you say you exclude almost every other place because either they're half planned, not planned at all, or not made for industry but planned. Washington D.C. is fully planned but not industrial. It's made for government, but it's gridded streets. New York City has a grid on Manhattan, but it's not made for industry. It's made for the commerce. You can say other places like Lowell, but Lowell is haphazard, and by being haphazard, it was not fully planned. It was partially planned, and so how can you compare it to the fully planned industrial location like Holyoke? Now, on a very small scale, you could say Turners Falls has a plan, but it's only one tiny village out of 5 villages, which is in Montague, and it's only a few streets on this rectangular plan, and it never grew to the industrial level, and it came later. This is the first fully planned industrial city in the world. Now, what could compare on this level? Aren't there other places? Well, you might say, what about Texas has all these towns like San Antonio, Dallas, Abilene, so forth. Don't they have a plan to them? Well, they're not industrial, right? Or they're not fully planned out, right? And so this is it.
And what are the reasons some of the streets off the grid are also interesting?
All right. So before there was a Holyoke, there were streets around. So, for instance, there was Northampton Street called the Street. And it had a lot of institutions on it. It had Craft's Tavern on it. It had a Baptist church, a Congregational church. It had 2 cemeteries. It had a lot on it. And so thus, you can get off this gridded pattern and still see a lot around. And other streets like Main Street, which goes out of the gridded pattern. And the streets towards the rural areas, north or west, are also very interesting because they're so rural. So Holyoke is not fully spread out with this grid. It's only basically in 4 wards or 4 neighborhoods. There's 15 neighbors to Holyoke. That means there's 11 that don't have this pattern. And so, sure, other streets are very interesting to look at.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our sponsors as well. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. So check out a large selection of our other podcasts at his website,